The laughter hit harder than any slap could. My son raised his glass and said, "Maybe Mom should sell that rusty truck before it falls apart. She's basically broke anyway." People laughed, even his wife. I smiled back, pretending it didn't sting, pretending my heart didn't drop right there between the wine glasses and the silver cutlery. My name is Dorabella Kingsley. And that night, as my son mocked me for being broke, I realized he had no idea. The very house he lived in, the one filled with their laughter, still belonged to me. He just didn't know it yet. The late May sun hung low over Savannah, washing the streets in gold. I parked outside my son's house, the same white 2-story home that once smelled of fresh paint and lavender when I first handed him the keys. From the sidewalk, it looked warm and perfect, soft lights glowing through the windows, laughter spilling into the evening air. But as I stepped inside, the warmth felt like someone else's. Guests filled the rooms, talking loudly over the music. Megan, my daughter-in-law, moved through the crowd like she owned the place. Polished smile, a diamond catching the light every time she raised her glass. "Gavin just got promoted," she announced, voice bright and smooth. "We're thinking about buying a second home soon." Everyone clapped. I joined them, proud for a moment, until Gavin, standing tall beside her, added with a grin, "Maybe Mom should sell that old truck before it falls apart. She's basically broke anyway." The laughter that followed was sharp. I felt it slice through me. I lifted my glass, forcing a smile, pretending the words didn't sting, pretending the room hadn't tilted slightly under my feet. My hands trembled, wine sloshing just enough to stain my wrist. "Oh, come on, honey," Megan chimed in, laughing. She's used to living simple. That's her charm. A few heads turned toward me, polite smiles, pitying eyes. I swallowed hard. The air felt thick, every sound muffled except for the pounding in my chest. Someone at the table whispered, "That's his mom? Poor woman, she looks tired." I wanted to leave, but I couldn't stand up without drawing more attention. So I sat there, nodding through the jokes, each one quieter than the last, until the candles burned low and I could finally slip away. Outside, the night air felt heavy. A soft drizzle began, blurring the lights from the porch behind me. My old pickup waited at the curb, its paint chipped, its mirror fogged by the rain. I sat there for a moment before starting the engine, staring at the house, their house now, filled with voices and light that no longer felt like home. My reflection in the glass looked calm, but my hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He'd laughed at me in front of strangers, and I'd smiled to keep the peace, the kind of peace that costs a mother everything. As I pulled away, a single thought came, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the noise still ringing in my head. That house, it still carries my name. The rain tapped against the windshield, steady and soft. He laughed at me for being broke. I whispered into the silence, but he forgot who built that roof. I didn't cry. I just drove, the lights fading behind me, and something inside me, something small but unbroken, began to wake. A few days passed after the party, but the echo of that laughter stayed. It filled the quiet corners of my apartment like an unwanted ghost. The place was small but neat. Everything had its place, even the loneliness. On the table sat an old notebook, edges frayed, its pages yellowing with years of numbers and memories. I opened it, running my fingers along faded ink. April, sold flower shop, tuition paid. June, mortgage cleared. Gavin's graduation suit. Each line felt like a scar, proof of sacrifices no one remembered. I could still see myself behind the counter of that little flower shop, hands covered in soil, smiling through exhaustion because every bouquet I sold brought my son one step closer to a better life. When Richard walked out, leaving behind debts and empty promises. I'd sold everything, the business, the car, even my wedding ring, just to keep us afloat. The day Gavin graduated, I cried until my chest ached. I remember clutching his diploma, whispering, "We made it." Later, when he married Megan, I gave them the house. It was supposed to be a symbol of love, not surrender. The lawyer had advised me years ago not to transfer the ownership. Keep the deed in your name, Mrs. Kingsley. Just let them live there. I'd kept it tucked away in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, telling myself it was just paperwork. Now, as the light poured through the window, I wasn't so sure. The sun hit the glass frame on the shelf. A photo of Gavin as a little boy, arranging flowers beside me, face lit up with pride. Next to it, a vase of dried lavender stood, its petals falling silently onto the notebook. The radio hummed softly from the counter, and by chance, "Stand by," me began to play. I smiled, bitterly. "You stood by no one." "Richard," I murmured. But I did. The apartment felt smaller then, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. I reached for my phone and called Gavin, straight to voicemail. I tried again later. This time, Megan answered. "He's busy, Mrs. Kingsley. We'll call you soon." Her tone was polite but cold, the kind of cold that comes from someone who wants distance without having to say it aloud. I sat there for a long moment after hanging up, staring at the lavender petals scattered across my bills. There was no anger yet, only the quiet realization that I no longer had a place in my own son's life. I closed the notebook gently, dusting off the fallen petals. The sunlight had shifted, now cutting a sharp line across the table, a quiet reminder that time had moved on, even if I hadn't. I didn't know it then, but that light, soft, golden, and almost cruel, was already pointing me toward the truth. The truth that the house I'd given away was never really gone. It still carried my name. And soon, I would need to remember what that meant. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when I decided to visit them unannounced. Maybe I just wanted to see Gavin, to remind myself that things weren't as distant as they felt. The house looked picture perfect from the outside, polished and new. Megan opened the door, surprise flashing in her eyes before her practiced smile appeared. "Oh, Mrs. Kingsley, I wish you'd called first," she said brightly. "We're meeting someone soon." I stepped inside. The smell of new furniture and expensive candles replaced the faint hint of lavender that used to live here. Every corner gleamed. The walls were lined with new photos, wedding portraits, vacations, smiles. The picture of Richard and me that once hung above the mantel was gone. While I waited in the living room, Megan's phone rang. She moved to the kitchen, her voice low but not low enough. "Yes, the owner's name is still Dorabella Kingsley, but she won't even notice. We just need it off the market quick." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like cold water. I stood there, every sound in the room muffled except for her voice. When she turned around, I was already watching her. "Megan," I said softly, "did you just say my name?" Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she smiled again. "Oh, it's nothing, Mrs. Kingsley, just some paperwork." I nodded, smiling back the same polite, brittle smile she'd mastered so well. "Of course," I said. My voice didn't shake, though my hands did. Before leaving, I walked through the kitchen. On the counter lay an open folder. Contracts, bold print, red ink. My eyes caught the top corner. Owner Dorabella Kingsley. A red line slashed through it, replaced by Megan Kingsley, spouse. I took a photo with my phone, the shutter sound tiny but deafening. My hand trembled, yet my gaze stayed steady. I placed the folder back exactly where it had been, wiped my fingers across the counter, and turned toward the door. At the threshold, I whispered to myself, "You think I'm broke? You'll learn how expensive dignity can be." Outside, the sky was overcast, heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen. I walked to my truck, heart steady, mind clear. The wound from that birthday laughter was still there, but now it had a shape, a direction, a purpose. They thought I'd given them everything. They were about to learn I hadn't even started taking it back. Monday morning, the sky above Savannah was a dull, pale blue, the kind that makes everything feel colder than it really is. I parked in front of the glass building where my son worked, sleek, modern, sterile, a monument to ambition. Through the wide lobby windows, I could already see him at the front desk, crisp white shirt, navy tie, hair neatly combed. He looked every inch the man I'd once prayed he would become, except now, I didn't recognize him. When he spotted me, surprise flickered across his face. Then came the polite smile, the one people wear for strangers. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I held his gaze, steady and calm. "I heard you're planning to sell the house." The air between us stilled. His smile faltered before he gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Mom, you gave it to us. That was a wedding gift." "A gift to use," I said quietly, "not to own." He blinked, confusion melting into irritation. "You can't just walk in and accuse us. We've built our life there." I tilted my head slightly, studying the son I'd raised. My voice stayed even. "And I built yours." The words landed heavier than I expected. For the first time, he looked small to me, not because he was weak, but because I'd finally stopped shrinking. His phone rang. He answered without thinking. I heard Megan's voice, sharp and impatient through the speaker. "Tell her to stop meddling. This is harassment." He fumbled to hang up, refusing to meet my eyes. That was all I needed to see. I rose from the chair, my purse over my shoulder. "I came here to talk, not to beg," I said softly. "If you keep pushing, I'll protect what's mine." He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me as I walked away. The first time, perhaps, he'd ever seen his mother stand tall. That evening, I opened the drawer in my small living room, the one I hadn't touched in years. The folder was still there. My name, Dorabella L. Kingsley, printed in bold black letters on the property deed. I traced the ink with my fingertips. "You were never just a house," I whispered. "You were the last piece of who I am." The paper didn't answer, but it didn't need to. It had waited for me long enough. The next morning, I found myself standing before an old brick building by the river. The sign on the door read, "Arthur Marin and Associates." It had been years since I'd seen him, Richard's old friend, one of the few who'd stayed decent. When I stepped inside, the scent of old wood and coffee filled the air. Arthur looked up from his desk, his silver hair catching the light. "Dorabella Kingsley," he said, rising to shake my hand. "It's been a long time, and I wish this visit was a pleasant one." I replied. I handed him the folder. He flipped through the pages carefully, eyes narrowing as the sunlight hit the top sheet. "You never signed the ownership transfer," he said finally. "Legally, it's still yours." For a moment, all I could do was stare. The room blurred around me. Years of trust, of believing I'd given everything away, unraveling in an instant. I didn't want to fight my own son, I murmured. Arthur leaned back in his chair. "You're not fighting him. You're protecting him from his wife's debt." The words hit harder than I expected. Megan's debt, of course. The designer handbags, the weekend trips, the perfect facade. It all made sense now. Arthur helped me draft a retrieval notice to reassert legal control of the property. Don't confront them yet, he advised. Let the paper do the talking. Keep everything on proof, recordings, messages, paper talks louder than tears. So I did. I started recording phone calls, saving messages from Megan that mentioned listing the house quickly before my husband finds out. Each piece was a brick in the wall I was building between their lies and my peace. That night, I sat by the table with a cup of tea, the room dim except for the glow of a single lamp. The photo of Gavin as a child stared back at me, chubby cheeks, dirt-stained hands holding a flower pot. You used to say you'd buy me a bigger shop one day, I whispered. Now you want to sell the roof over my head. A single tear landed on the deed, spreading the ink slightly. I wiped it away before it could stain. I'd shed enough for one lifetime. The phone rang early the next morning. Arthur's voice was steady. Dorabella? I've filed the retrieval notice. From this moment on, they can't sell or modify the property. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Then it begins, I said. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the fight ahead. I was ready for it. A week later, my phone rang just as the sky began to darken. Gavin's voice came through, thin, tired, almost rehearsed. Mom, Megan made dinner. She wants to apologize. Let's start fresh. I didn't believe a word of it, but I agreed. Not because I wanted peace, but because I needed to see just how far they'd go. I slipped into the soft blue dress I'd worn at their wedding years ago. It wasn't sentimentality that made me choose it. It was a reminder that I no longer feared the people living under the roof I built. The house was glowing when I arrived. Warm light, soft music, candles flickering. The scent of lasagna, the kind Gavin used to beg for when he was a boy, filled the air. But the warmth was hollow, the kind that masks rot underneath. Megan met me at the door, a pearl necklace catching the light, smile polished and empty. Mrs. Kingsley, she said sweetly, we've been meaning to clear the air. I took my seat at the table, the flicker of the candles dancing between us. My eyes caught something on the credenza by the window, a gold envelope stamped property agreement. What's this? I asked. Oh, just a formality, she said, that sugary voice too light. We need you to sign it so the mortgage company stops calling. I opened it. Inside lay the papers transferring full ownership of the house. My name printed neatly, waiting to be replaced. I uncapped the pen, signed one line, then stopped. That's interesting, I said, my tone as calm as hers, because I filed a retrieval notice this morning. The room went still. Gavin's hand froze mid-air. Megan's smile faltered, and for a heartbeat, even the music seemed to hush. You what? She whispered. It means, I said evenly, this house is still mine, legally and morally. The candle nearest to me flickered violently and went out, leaving a thin curl of smoke between us. Megan slammed her hand on the table. You can't do this. We've lived here for years. You said it was ours. I said you could live here, I replied, voice steady. Not own it. Gavin's voice cracked. Mom, please, don't humiliate us like this. I met his eyes. Humiliate you? You already did that for me at your birthday. The rain began tapping against the windows, quiet but insistent. I reached into my bag, pulled out a copy of the deed, and laid it gently between us. This paper doesn't lie, I said, but you did. Then I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. The silence behind me felt heavier than any goodbye. That night, back in my apartment, I found an email from Arthur waiting, Dorabella. They're filing a counterclaim tomorrow. Be ready. I smiled faintly at the screen. Let them. I've been ready for years. The courthouse in Chatham County glowed under the morning lights, bright and sterile, like the inside of a confession. I sat beside Arthur, my navy coat buttoned to the collar, hands folded over the file in my lap. Across the aisle, Megan sat stiffly beside a young, overconfident attorney. Gavin was behind her, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman they'd once called broke now sat before them with everything that mattered: truth, proof, and her own name still printed on the deed. The opposing lawyer rose first. "Your Honor," he began, "Mrs. Kingsley gifted this house years ago. My clients have invested, maintained, and improved it. She's only reclaiming it now out of spite." Arthur didn't even flinch. "We'd like to submit Exhibit A," he said calmly, "the original deed showing no transfer of ownership, and Exhibit B, a fax sent by Mrs. Megan Kingsley to a real estate agent, falsifying the owner's signature." The screen lit up with the document, Megan's handwriting slashing across my name. The courtroom fell silent. Megan's face turned the color of paper. Gavin's gaze sank lower, shame blooming across his expression. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Kingsley, did you authorize this sale?" I shook my head. "No, Your Honor. I didn't authorize my humiliation either." Arthur played one last piece, the recording of Megan's voice. Clear, cold, listed under her name. She'll never notice. The sound hung in the air like a blade. Gavin stood, eyes wide, voice breaking. "You did this behind my back?" Megan began to cry, words tripping over tears, but no one believed her. The judge raised the gavel. "The property legally belongs to Mrs. Dorabella Kingsley. The defendants are ordered to vacate within 14 days. When the gavel struck wood, I exhaled, not in triumph, but relief, not joy, not anger, just release. Gavin turned to me, his voice small. "Mom, I'm sorry." I met his eyes, then looked past him, out the courtroom window where the light spilled across the magnolia trees. Sometimes, victory doesn't roar, it breathes. As we stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of the river. A single magnolia petal drifted down, landing in my hand, delicate, unbroken. Arthur's voice was low beside me. "Sometimes justice looks quiet, but it echoes loud." I smiled, closing my fingers around the petal. "Yes," I said softly, "it does." 3 days after the court ruling, Savannah smelled of rain and lavender. The drizzle had softened the streets, the air damp and clean, the way it always is after justice finally settles in. I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house that had once been the heart of my world, the place where everything began, and where, years later, everything nearly broke. Through the window, I saw boxes stacked against the walls. Gavin was packing, shoulders bent, shirt clinging wet against his back. Megan was gone. The house felt quieter without her, as if it were finally breathing again. He turned when he saw me at the doorway. "Mom," his voice cracked. "I didn't know she forged your signature." I stepped closer, rain dripping from my coat. "You didn't have to," I said softly. "You just had to listen." There was no anger left in my voice, no bitterness, just the truth sitting plainly between us. He sank down onto the porch steps, elbows resting on his knees. "I thought I was making you proud." I looked at him. Not the man who hurt me, but the boy who once believed kindness could build a future. "You were," I said quietly, "until you started measuring pride in dollars." The words landed gently but deeply. He dropped his head into his hands. For a moment, I saw him at 8 years old, swinging on the old wooden swing that used to hang from the magnolia tree in the yard. "One day, I'll buy you a mansion, Mom," he'd said back then, laughing. Now? I looked out at the rain and whispered, "You don't need a mansion to be decent." He wiped at his face, but the tears kept coming. The sound of rain filled the silence that followed, slow, rhythmic, forgiving. Arthur's car pulled up by the curb. He walked toward me with his briefcase and a quiet smile. "Dorabella," he said, "it's time." Inside, at the kitchen counter, he laid out the final documents. My hands trembled slightly as I took the pen, not from fear, from the weight of it all. When the ink met the paper, a raindrop slid through the open window and landed on my signature, spreading the black line into a soft blur. "You've reclaimed it," Arthur said, closing the folder. "Not just the house," I murmured. "Myself." The words lingered in the air longer than I expected. Gavin finished loading the last box into his car. He stood in the rain for a long time before turning back toward me. His eyes were red, his voice unsteady. "Mom?" he said. "I'm sorry for making you feel small." I stepped forward, resting a hand on the doorframe. "I was never small." "Gavin," I said. "I just stood quietly for too long." He nodded, tears cutting lines through the rain on his face. And then he drove away. The taillights faded down the street until all that remained was the hush of the drizzle and the soft hum of wind through the magnolia branches. When I closed the door behind me, the house didn't echo like it used to. It felt still, not empty, but peaceful. For the first time in years, it was mine again. Not just the deed, the silence, the dignity, the life I'd built, and the woman I'd become. A week after the ruling, my name appeared in the local paper. The widow who reclaimed her house and her dignity. The story spread quickly. A woman of 58 winning a case against her own daughter-in-law for property fraud, refusing compensation, choosing peace instead of profit. I read the article once, then folded the paper neatly and set it aside. The kettle whistled softly as I poured tea into my favorite porcelain cup, the one with lavender painted around the rim. The world might call it revenge. I called it restoration. Outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth and magnolia blossoms. The house was quiet again. Not hollow, just calm. Arthur had told me that Megan left Savannah a few days after the verdict. She was under investigation for falsifying more financial documents, the kind she used to buy a life she couldn't afford. Gavin filed for divorce soon after. He didn't come to see me this time, but he sent a message. "I'm working to become the man you raised, not the one I became." I didn't reply. Instead, I smiled. Sometimes silence is the kindest answer a mother can give. Life began to unfold slowly again. I reopened the old sunroom, scrubbed the dust from the windows, and turned it into a small flower studio. Dorabella's Blooms, a place not for profit, but for women like me. My first student was a young widow who hesitated at the door, her voice trembling. I just wanted to feel useful again. I handed her a handful of fresh stems and said, "You already are. You just forgot." Each bloom that opened in the shop felt like something inside me healing, a quiet, gentle rebirth. One afternoon, as the light softened, Gavin showed up. He didn't say much, just helped me hang the new wooden sign over the doorway. The letters were carved by hand. Dorabella's Blooms, home of second chances. He stepped back, wiping his palms on his jeans, waiting for my approval. I looked at the sign, then at him, and nodded. "You see, Gavin?" I said softly. "Some homes grow flowers, not walls." He smiled, The same boyish smile I hadn't seen in years. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender through the open door, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something that wasn't anger or sadness. It was grace, quiet, steady, and finally, mine. The late autumn sun stretched low across Savannah, its golden light spilling through the window and brushing against a new photograph on the mantel. Gavin and me, standing side by side at the opening of Dorabella's blooms. The air was still, except for the soft chime of the wind bells swaying on the porch. Inside, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a long storm, when silence itself feels like grace. I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window, the fading light painting the walls in amber. My journal lay open beside me, pages half filled with scattered thoughts and lessons I'd learned the hard way. I wrote slowly, the words flowing steady. People think poverty is having no money, but real poverty is forgetting your own worth. I set the pen down and looked around. Every corner of this house once held the echo of hurt, raised voices, disappointment, loneliness. Now, it held something else entirely, warmth, pride, dignity, the kind that doesn't come from victory, but from finally understanding who you are. The phone buzzed on the table, a message from Gavin. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me." I smiled and typed back, "I never did. I just needed to remember myself first." I placed the phone down and listened to the soft patter of rain beginning to fall outside, to the gentle clink of the wind chime, to the rhythm of peace filling a space that had once been so loud with grief. After a while, I rose and opened the window. The breeze carried in the scent of lavender from the garden, shaking the vase on the table until a single petal slipped loose and drifted down onto my notebook. It landed beside the words I'd just written, a small, perfect punctuation. I looked out at the yard, the magnolia branches swaying slowly in the rain. "He mocked me for being broke," I whispered, voice soft but steady. But I was only broke of mercy, not power. The wind curled through the curtains, cool and gentle against my face. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, the scent of lavender, of rain, of something finally made whole again. Peace, at last, in the old house that never stopped waiting for me to come home.